Real Nerds is a proud partner of the Denver Podcast Network. In the shadow of the mountains,
we speak. Coming to you from the X-Axis, it's John of All Trades with your host, John X.
Welcome to this John of All Trades podcast promo. Each Wednesday, I bring you a brand new interview with someone fascinating and ask the question we all ask when we meet someone new. Hey, what do you do? It's fun, informative, and it's the 2017 Westward Reader's Choice Award winner for Best Denver Podcast, iTunes, Stitcher, and johnofalltrades.us.
Oh, hi, podcast listeners. There's many ways you can listen to the Real Nerds podcast. You can subscribe on iTunes. You can also subscribe on Stitcher Radio. You want to send us a Twitter message? You can do that. It's so easy, at Real Nerds. Like us on Facebook, Real Nerds Podcast. You can visit our website, realnerdspodcast.com, where there'll be a lot of articles for you to not only read, but to listen to our previous shows. You can also call us, 720-6nerds5. Thanks for listening, and enjoy the show.
Hi, this is Brian. No, this is my announcer voice, and you're listening to Real Nerds Podcast. Should I do this as my real self? Oh, shucky darn. Hi, this is Brian Cummings. You're listening to Real Nerds Podcast. Okay, do it straight. Hi, this is Brian Cummings, and actually you are listening to Real Nerds Podcast. Send money and real estate.
Welcome to another Real Nerds Podcast interview from Denver Pop Culture Con 2019. Hope you enjoy.
Welcome to Denver Pop Culture Con 2019, live on the showroom floor. We are joined by author Dan Grant. Thanks, Dan, for coming on our show.
Oh, thank you for having me.
So what brings you to Denver?
So I actually live local and stuff like that, and last year I presented on the author track. I did a villain session and science, magic, and a wizardry and storytelling last year, and then again this year I came back with, I have two books out now. They're both thrillers. My style is science and medicine and science fiction and thrillers and stuff like that, and so I'm also doing the author stuff. I did a villains thing 2 days ago, we did the hero's journey 2 days ago, and then I do a villains session today. Villains, they're heroes of their own journey and stuff like that. So I do the hero thing that I do is a little bit different. We did a buy one get one last year with Doctor Strange and Thor Ragnarok on the hero's journey storytelling wheel, and this year they wanted a little bit of a DC flavor. So with DC coming out with both Wonder Woman and Aquaman, it was fun to place them in the same setting so that you could analyze and figure out how they told those stories in the classical hero's journey structure.
And I think you're right, too, because if you ask any villain, they don't think they're the villain. They think
absolutely.
they're the hero of their story, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the unique things, I think, at least in our culture, is our villains are getting a lot more sophisticated and deeper, and that makes them fun because they're not the cardboard cutouts of yesterday where, they appear and then boom, bad things happen, and then they get, their fate, their just due and stuff like that. Marvel does a really great job with their villains. Actually, so does DC and stuff in the comic book world. And that makes talking about them really fun in the whole journey structure of the heroes versus villains and stuff like that. And some ways we want to root for the villains in some cases where they're not all so clear, where the villain isn't all evil, they're a little bit of a mix and stuff like that.
Because I agree 100%. Have you seen Endgame and Infinity War?
Oh, yes.
So,
we're not allowed to talk about Endgame.
Yeah, right?
Spoiler alert.
If you ask Thanos, he believes he's
That's right.
doing everything right, and he's not the bad guy. The Avengers are the bad guy from stopping him from balancing the universe.
And he's doing what is right and just in his world as a personification of how he sees the universe. And, in his particular case, it's overcrowded, too densely populated. People aren't allowed to thrive and survive. And so his thing is he's trying to be compassionate, oddly enough, in his own way, where he's just dividing them, but he doesn't always pick and choose. And in the Avengers case, he actually did choose a little bit because he did allow Tony Stark to survive, at least in the Infinity War and stuff like that, where we lost other Avengers and stuff, which people cried about. It's so sad. But yeah, and he was the ultimate villain. Look at how many Avengers have to face him to even without the magic hand and the Infinity Storms. He's actually quite the villain. So definitely not a cardboard cutout there.
I agree. So let's talk about how do you write a compelling villain then in your thrillers?
Yeah, so I have an engineering background by degree, and I've been really fortunate in my area of engineering. I've got to work with a lot of research, and whether it's medical research or lab research, Department of Defense stuff, I got to see a lot of stuff that most people don't. And I ask questions. I'm always asking questions about, well, what about this? What about that? The first novel that I have, the thriller that I have that came out, is called The Singularity Witness. It came out last October. And it's about a neurological researcher that has cutting-edge research that nobody else has, and they're killing to obtain it. And I have a co-hero in that case, Kate Morgan. She's an FBI agent, and she's looking for a missing senator, so she needs a doctor to get in the research lab. Once they're in the lab, bad things happen. And I loved her so much that I wrote a different style of thriller that's a parallel story. It's not a sequel, with just her, and it just came out this May. So I'm trying to find ways to make the stories a little magical, where I'm trying to do my research on my end and find aspects of science and science fiction and medicine that maybe people don't see, or they may not know unless they're really a geek and a nerd and that's what they love. And then I try to weave it in the fabric of the story so that there's a compelling tapestry that the characters are placed against. So there's a fabric there of how the story's told against, and that gives it a little bit extra life and stuff. And I definitely have a science, medicine slant, science fiction slant on the first one. And the second one is really Catch Me If You Can, with a little bit of back science of super soldiers that I actually read in a white paper years ago about the ethics of the test tube generation, of what they were trying to do and the government wanted to achieve. And the unique thing there was the guy who wrote it is really an ethicist, and his question was, should we be doing this? Which gave me great fuel for a villain. And he tells his story in a crossword puzzle because he blames the FBI agent for killing his family. So it's set across 7 stops in Washington, D.C. that are not the typical, I go to the Washington Monument, I'm going to Lincoln Memorial. I actually take you to an insane asylum, a monastery, a Civil War graveyard. So I'm doing these places that give Washington, D.C. a little bit more life. And I found it fun. I just love traipsing through the different places, learning about stuff. And I only use 10% of what I do on my research in the story because it's really a character-driven story and stuff like that. So,
because that's going to actually kind of be my question, is because I'm dumb. And so when you put in the medical and all the, I guess, the research into the medical stuff, how do you make it accessible to someone who doesn't necessarily understand that aspect of medical profession?
So I'll put it into the plot in terms of a needed tool that they have to go get or use. And there's a piece in The Singularity Witness that human organ generation artificially has been around for a while, whether it's livers or whatever else, and that's called organoids and stuff. And the great thing about medicine is the heart, I think, is in the right place for most of the researchers because it's going to benefit society about repairing the liver and everything else. Well, what I did is I extrapolated that into the mind because a disease like the Parkinson's or Alzheimer's is so destructive that we are only treating it with drugs really to repair it. Well, there's a whole series of neurologists working on organoids as a little mini brain. And when I came across that, I'm going, oh, wow, what could you do with a mini brain? And the great thing of a perfect example of what science is doing is instead of using a laboratory rat or a monkey to experiment on, they can actually put a disease in the little mini brain and then use cancer drugs to treat the disease before they go to trials for humans, which is really sort of a cool thing. Well, if you if you take it into evil extremes, you could say, well, what if I put inputs into the little mini brain? Can I do things with it? And that gives another piece there. And so now there's a little of a tug of war of ethics. So what I'm always trying to do is find little interesting tidbits that I could use as flavor to add to the secret sauce of the story. So I'm trying to make it accessible to everybody so that you don't have to always be a nerd or a geek in that area. Maybe your interest is in, NASA and stuff like that. Well, I'm not doing space missions to Mars, but I'm doing other stuff. And if you blend in the aspect of conspiracy and greed, human greed is a great element for villains. It's a great playground to be in. So, yeah.
Did you have a question, Zach? I interrupted you two
Sorry,
questions ago.
No, I've been looking over kind of like the descriptions of everything, and like the 13 Across, just kind of like weaving in some history and landmarks into your stories sounds very interesting. Like, are you a history buff, and do you kind of weave that stuff into it, or is it kind of just like, it's an idea that sounds good, let's go with it?
No, I'm actually one of these people that you yell squirrel, I turn my head, right? So, squirrel. I'll go down that rabbit hole. I already knew that when I wrote the story, I actually wrote these stories years ago in the late 90s. My career took off, and then my wife encouraged me to take them out. So I dusted them off, and I totally rewrote them. They're not the same story. But I knew in that one it was a crossword puzzle. So what I actually had to do is break the crossword puzzle in 7 different stops in Washington, D.C., so I had to make the crossword puzzle add to the backstory of the villain and actually have a destination or a location, a meaning for the villain to. Why would the heroine who's chasing him go to that location? What would she learn by that little piece of tidbit? So I go out and do my research. I went to all the different places, traipsed around in the woods looking for stones discarded from the Capitol had a remodel, and they discarded what's called Capitol stones. Well, I wanted to build that into the story. Why is that important and stuff like that? So it actually adds to everybody's past in some way, and it shows some flaws. The reason, just like Thanos, the villain needs, who's a disenfranchised super soldier, he needs a reason to tell his story, and he's doing it in such a grand manner that the government can't cover it up. So that's his version of the crossword puzzle, is doing something so horrific across Washington, D.C., that the government, because of the media, is so involved in things, they just can't hush it up. He's going to tell his story, and everybody will grab into it, and they'll learn a lot more about him and the reason and everything else. And so it sort of gave me a compelling piece to paint against as an artist.
Yeah. And I was flipping through, and I saw that you kind of incorporate crossword puzzles into it, like in between certain things and whatnot. So I found that interesting that you would kind of bring the reader into the story even further with a little bit of not a picture and illustration, but just like a companion to the whole scenario. And you have Will Shortz in the book, which is a fun little tidbit for people who if they haven't read about Will Shortz and what he does to create those crossword puzzles. It's like a fascinating element to add into it.
Yeah, Will was fantastic. In my level in my effort to do research, I wanted to know about the lore of crossword puzzles, and I wanted to know a few things that I didn't know as a hobbyist for crossword puzzles. Everybody can kick my butt in crossword puzzles, but I needed to know a little bit more, and I emailed him, and he was gracious enough to email back. And then I asked him questions, and we had this 40-minute-plus conversation, just this little dialogue going on. And I was asking him, well, what's the word that covers the whole crossword? Is there a label to that? And he thought for a moment, and there wasn't. So we sort of joked around, well, maybe it's a 15 or if it's a 15 by 15 grid. And so I was trying to figure out a little bit of the depth on crossword puzzles and how things are sort of done, some of the rules by which I break in this. And he was so gracious with his time. At the end, I said, well, would you mind being a fictionalized version of yourself? And he said yes, which is really gracious on his part. So not only did I complicate a thriller by putting a crossword puzzle in it, but I also added a real character to it as well. And I had to stay semi-true to who he is as a person. he has a little bit of a celebrity and fandom in crosswords and everything else. He does National Public Radio with his show. He edits for the New York Times. He goes out and talks to people about wordplay and stuff. Very talented person. But I said, are there limits that I can use with your character? And he said, no, not really. So I made a promise. Somebody I know, a friend writes for the Jack Ryan series and Tom Clancy, and he joked in his contract that he can't kill off Jack Ryan. And I made Will Shortz the same promise. I won't kill you off. Your fans will still enjoy you. So hopefully he enjoys the story. He got a copy. I just came out with that in May, right before the con here. So hopefully he enjoys it. I try to do a couple things more than just using him as the subject matter expert. I try to get him out of the box and do different things. So that was fun because as a creative artist, you're trying to go, well, what if this, what if that, and I wanted to get him out of the cube of the FBI. The FBI helped on some questions that I had. I've been really blessed that people gave me, the National Park Service talked to me and the FBI talked to me, and I would just ask them questions, and rarely did somebody say, no, we can't answer that. So I wanted as much authenticity to it as possible. So hopefully Will finds it a little intriguing of what he does. It's probably a little weird to read about himself in third person.
You're like, I'm in this? Oh, my.
So do you write the crossword puzzles before you write the story, or do you write the crossword puzzles after you've written the story and use them as a tool to solve the thriller you're telling? Because that's really fascinating to me.
Yeah, so in this 13 Across, I'm a plotter, so I build the plot outline of the story, and then I free write or I pants between those plot points. And the great thing about having the latitude to free write and pants is it allows me to be a little bit more organic and ask more questions. Where I'm just a plotter, so many plotters don't deviate from the plot structure. I like the freedom of asking those questions, like, oh, I need to go back and fix this, or what. In Will's case, I have him go out on an errand because everybody else is in chaos in the FBI, and he can go out and do something. So it's new territory for him to go out and do something. As the little joke is, he's the errand boy, and he finds himself in a very peculiar situation. The heroine is the same way. She's caught up in these dastardly deeds and everything else, and she's on the front lines of solving stuff, and she's really a forensics person with a medical. She wanted to be family medicine, and so her life had a back tragedy and stuff like that, and she left family medicine to be forensics. So part of that is how organically can I put her in situations that aren't a forensics person's, and make her a field agent, which she's really not. So she's actually learning how to be a field agent for the FBI and stuff like that. So I just love using that plot structure as sort of to get me there, but then I'll go ahead and deviate it. Obviously, with the crossword puzzle, there was only actually one word that I officially had to replace at the end, that it didn't work, but everything else I managed to make work in some way. I do use 2-letter acronyms for words, because in my particular puzzle it wasn't working out to always be a 3-character or greater word or a phrase or something like that. But yeah, it was fun. And then how do you make that piece flavor back or touch back to the location? And that everything had to be either backstory or location. And that was the challenge of finding those destinations that made it up with a puzzle, and then breaking it up in 7 elements so that it was still a mystery till the bitter end and stuff like that. And so I knew where I was going for the most part. I did have to change a few things up after writing the initial scenes and then going out to D.C. and going, well, this ain't going to work, or I could fictionalize it, but then readers who go to those places would know, well, dude, you went way off the map. It's nothing like what you said. So I try to make that. The first book is set in Princeton, so I had a Princeton flavor to it and stuff like that. Lived nearby for a year with my wife and stuff like that. So I just fell in love with Princeton. It's a wonderful place, a wonderful college town, and the whole town itself.
Right.
Well, where can we find you, and where can we buy your books?
So I'm wide as an author, so you can find me at most major retailers, whether that's Barnes & Noble or Amazon here locally. You can order through the Tattered Cover if I'm not there. You can find me at dangrantbooks.com. If you want to email me, it's pretty simple. It's dan@dangrantbooks.com. So I'm pretty accessible. I'm going to work both of these story sets in their own series almost, where I want to come back with Kate Morgan and the FBI. And somebody asked, actually, on the Singularity Witness, I had a book group ask about one of the other villains, and they want to know about her. So maybe I'll throw in a side story about a middle-aged ex-wife of a senator that is gone rogue. So yeah, female fatale there. So yeah.
So thank you, Dan, for stopping by and sharing. This sounds awesome.
Well,
so
thank you for
sharing
having
your
me.
stories with us.
Absolutely.
Have a good rest of the con. Couple hours. I don't know. When you're here for so long, it's all blends together.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Hey, thank you.
This has been another Real Nerds Podcast interview from Denver Pop Culture Con 2019. See you next year.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Real Nerds Podcast. Real Nerds Podcast is a production of Nebulous Visions Multimedia. Thank you to Sparks Mandrill and Plan 9 Studios for our kick-ass theme song. Also, if you're in the Denver area and you're looking for a cool place to see movies, we see them at the Alamo Drafthouse in Littleton and now also in Sloan's Lake. Thank you to Colorado Coins, Cards, and Comics for supplying us with all our comic needs, especially you, Andrew. You know who you are. And a big shout out to James's mom. I'm giving you an electronic hug that you can feel through the airwaves. Thanks for listening, and have a nice day.